activities. For example, last September, TFO had organized a Kannada Movie Month where filmmakers Prithvi Konnanur and Srinidhi Bengaluru and screenplay writer Ananta Chandreya joined the discussion. Filmmakers often provide their films exclusively for TFO members to watch by generously sharing links to their film. And we've had both first time filmmakers such as Bani Singh and Clayne Johnson, as well as well known auteurs such as Deepa Dhanraj, Jayant Cherian, Girish Kasaravalli, Adur Gopalakrishnan, Aparna Sen, Anjali Montero, KP Jayashankar, etc., join the discussion of their respective films. During June every year, to mark its anniversary, TFO organizes the Smartphone Short Film Competition for students between 18 to 25 years of age. Submissions to the 5th annual Smartphone Short Film Competition are now open, and the last day for submission is 15th of May 2025. TFO also organized its first in-person seminar on September 30th and October 1st last year in collaboration with the Forum on Contemporary Theory, Baroda. This international seminar was titled Indian Cinema in the Digital Era, Continuities and Discontinuities. The aim of TFO is to get a conversation going around cinema and to get as many people involved in the process as possible. With the weekly events being online, anyone and everyone interested in cinema is welcome to TFO. TFO has a WordPress blog where all kinds of writings on cinema are encouraged. TFO's YouTube channel is called Talking Films Online, where you can watch some of the discussions. TFO has a private group on Facebook, and there is also a WhatsApp group where the posters with the film links for discussion and Zoom links are posted. Today, we are discussing the 1977 film Suspiria, which was made in English and Italian. The film was suggested for discussion by Dr. Asmita Kundu. Asmita Kundu is an academic fellow at the Balwant Parekh Center for General Semantics and Other Human Sciences in Baroda. She has completed a Doctor of Philosophy in English Literature with her thesis titled The Evolution and Ambiguities of Secularism in India, a study of select novels, late 19th to early 20th century, from the Center of English Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. She has also completed her Master's in Philosophy and Master of Arts in English Literature from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her research interests include South Asian literature, literary history, queer studies, and popular culture. She has formerly worked as an English language and literature educator. Cannot wait to start discussing this exciting film. So over to you, Dr. Asmita Kundu.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask if Nikhila can give me the sharing privileges? Because also, I'm sorry, I'm navigating between two devices because my laptop camera is not working. So, yeah, if I can just have the sharing option, then I'll start.
I'm trying to do that. Just give me a moment.
Okay, yeah. Can I just reclaim host for
Yeah,
2
that
seconds?
is better. Yes, Ashmita, you can reclaim host. Yeah.
Okay, and I'll do that, and you can then take back host later on. Okay.
Yeah, so that you're not disturbed in your presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
And okay. Yeah. All right. So just give me 1 second. Yeah. Is it visible? I think, right? Uh,
Yes, it's visible.
okay. Yeah. So I will have to first thank Geeta and Nikhila for giving me this opportunity again. It's always a pleasure to come over here and discuss movies that I like. I'm not a film buff per se, except for the fact that I restrict myself to the genre of horror. And thank you, Pradya, for introducing. So, today we will be discussing this movie Suspiria 1977, directed by Dario Argento, and he is pretty well known as a horror and a thriller filmmaker in Italian cinema and worldwide. And Suspiria also happens to be one of the horror classics that people go back to. So therefore, it's again a very it's a pleasure for me to have this opportunity to discuss this movie. So actually, this movie, among like many other movies, falls into this specific genre called giallo, which in Italian simply means yellow, right? Actually, this happened to be the genre of pulp, very cheap pulp crime fiction and horror novels, but mostly mystery novels, which were largely translated from Italian translations of English novels or even popular pulp fiction. And they were printed in very cheap yellow pages, and that's why the name giallo, which means yellow. And there have been a lot of movies which were made based on these stories, but they had a very, very individual style in themselves. Namely, the style would involve very heightened violence, psychological horror, but not psychological horror how we understand it, mainly in the sense that it's not a very subtle, slow burn psychological horror fiction. It's very out there. It's very pronounced, and it will involve mystery plots. And one of the things, if for all of you who have watched Suspiria, you will remember that the movie uses a lot of vivid colors, and each and every frame is replete with colors. The colors are part of the movie, and this so in the giallo cinematic experience, the aesthetics of heightened color and sound is something which is very characteristic, right? And usually giallo movies, like some of the posters that I have you can see on the screen, they would have like a mix of detective fiction, slasher, and supernatural elements. And the key figures would be Mario Bava, Dario Argento, and Lucio Fulci, right? Now, Suspiria is considered most one of the most well-known giallo movies. However, it also makes a lot of departure, in the sense that when giallo novels and also movies dealt more with murder mystery, this film, of course, deals with the supernatural horror element of it. However, if you look at Argento's other movies of this specific genre, you will see a blend of both. Both horror and mystery and thriller are kind of tied together. We will discuss later on that he has made other movies which talk about Suspira is actually a part of a trilogy, the Three Mothers trilogy. We will get into that. And Suspiria is the first one. There are some thematic similarities between the movies. However, you will see that the other movies that Dario has made, it kind of leans with a murder has happened, and there's this suspense lurking around to find out who is this, sort of playing with the whodunit trope. But of course, because it's still horror, it deals with a lot of supernatural elements as well. You can obviously argue that this movie also initially starts with like this murder of a girl, and we don't know like why this student was killed, right? And who killed killed her. And later on, as it unfolds, it becomes clearer. But if for I would say that the plot is not as important in this case. And Dario Argento's one of the signature style has always been that it focuses on atmosphere more than plot coherence. It's very atmospheric and very um, so to say very ambient and very visceral experience that you can have through the movies. And it follows this mixture of very vibrant colors, sound, and dream logic. And then that's why it sort of moves beyond the traditional giallo narratives, and instead leans into this nightmarish, like sort of a fairy tale esque atmosphere. I'm sorry about my camera moving by here and there because I'm holding my phone in a very awkward way. Okay, so one of the things that is very important about and very very obvious about when you watch Suspiria, which I've been talking about, is how magnificent. If I can describe this movie in one word, I would say that it's very very beautiful. It in fact makes horror a very very aesthetic experience. Now, for those of you who are experienced in watching a lot of horror movies, there are very different kinds of horror cinema also, which are quite beautiful and aesthetically pleasing to look at. For example, if you have watched A Tale of Two Sisters, that is also very, very aesthetically pleasing at least in the initial parts. But that kind of beautiful and this kind of beautiful is quite different, because this movie deals with this very splash of color, which almost like in a way assaults your senses, but in the best and the worst way possible, right? And this is because of his use of the technicolor process. Now I am not like a student of cinema studies, so I don't know the technicalities of it as much, but I do know that it was a process which was begun to be used in 1930s and 50s. And so they would take like the reels and they would pass it down through this specific kind of camera, technicolor with technicolor processes, and the result ended up being very very hyper saturated scenes, very dreamlike colors. If you have watched movies like Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind, you would see that the colors are very condensed and very concentrated. Like if you have a red lipstick or a red dress, that it is very very like the red becomes very very focused in the technicolor. Now by the time Suspiria was made, of course technicolor was not as used or not used at all, as if I'm correct. But Argento deliberately wanted to use this aesthetic to into a horror context, because he wanted to create a world where the colors from which you can draw any kind of symbolism out of, those colors will be everywhere. If you have watched the movie, you know that how prominent the color red is. The red appears in the hallways, in the walls, there's blood, but this blood is not made significant where, in an otherwise muted frame, the it pops out. On the other hand, uh, the blood is made very very um, prominent and very conspicuous, because the red is almost everywhere. You're almost thrown into this world, very colorful world, where each and everything that will acquire symbolism for you is always around you, right? And for that reason, one can say that Suspiria doesn't really look real per se. And this not looking real is in the sense that it looks like a fairy tale as well as a nightmare, like a very, very dark fairy tale aesthetic that it almost spontaneously has throughout all the frames, even when something terrifying is not happening, right? This is just some of the screen grabs from other technicolor cinema, which where you can see like how the colors are very, very pronounced, right? Now, um, in order to talk about Suspiria, one thing, this movie was inspired by this 1948 British film called The Red Shoes. And as you can see on the screen, The Red Shoes tells the story of very similar, like a ballerina caught between love and her obsession with dance. And it talks about like themes of control and sacrifice. This initial, like this ballet school narrative is something which had inspired Argento to make the red shoe, like make Suspiria. And this movie is also very, very famous for its surreal, like these very long ballet sequences where as the characters are dancing, the reality almost blends into fantasy, and it also uses a lot of bold colors and experimental visuals. Another, other than the visuals, another important aspect of Suspiria has to be the sound. The signature soundtrack of Suspiria is very, very famous. It was composed by Goblin. Goblin is an Italian progressive rock band, and the sound is extremely part of the story. The stars, the soundtracks, the music, the background scores almost stand out as a character in themselves. And with Goblin, Arkendo had worked before on his other movies like Deep Red, but as I said before, they had created one of the most iconic horror scores ever. This sound is supposed to create this sense of uh, almost like a very, very like trippy LSD like experience. If you're watching the movie, it's very chaotic, hypnotic, and it's more than a dream sequence. It's not, I don't think it can be, I don't know if it the movie can be called a surrealist in this particular way as we usually associate visuals with that term, but it definitely has that effect at times, and especially that is because of the combination of the visuals with that of the sound. And it's this mixture of whispered voices, this strange sudden like cracking of mirrors, and this very pounding rhythms which create this atmospheric quality. And this is just something I found that he all I wanted like his actors to also be in a state of constant discomfort, so he would blast the soundtrack on set. Now, now Goblin's scores, therefore, it makes, as I said, I've used this phrase before, this assault on the senses, but it definitely adds on to it. If you are uh, taking away the soundtrack, I do not think the movie will remotely be the same. Of course, that can be said about most cinema, but specifically in Suspiria, I feel the soundtrack by Goblin had played a very, very important role in creating the element of horror. Now, coming back to some of the important, like the themes of the cinema that stuck out to me is that it has this extremely, the visuals, the story, it has both have a very, very fairy tale like quality. Like Susie, the protagonist, when she goes to this ballet school, it's almost like the ballet school, the interiors and everything that resembles a dark forest, right? And there a lot of people have made connections with Susie and Little Red Riding Hood in like and her journey. The film definitely plays a lot with mythical and very mythical elements and logic, and it definitely is not meant to be realistic. And sure, no, most horror movies are not supposed to be realistic, but it is not the usual flow, right? So when usually, like conventionally, a lot of horror cinema follows this thing that initially, at least, there is a sense of normalcy which gets disrupted. But in this case, it's not like that. You are just directly thrown into a completely mythical, like fairy tale, nightmarish universe. And some of the other elements from the movie which I thought ended up being very, very symbolic of fairy tale narratives is one being when the girls constantly hear this shadowy snoring figure, right? They cannot see who is snoring, but the behind the screens there is a snoring mistress or someone who is there, and it's snoring in this very odd, very haunting, odd manner. And to me, it felt like it was resembling a sleeping monster in the palace. Like, this is a trope that we have seen in fairy tales many times, right? In fact, Pavlos, who played one of the helpers or the workers in the ballet school, I felt that he was deliberately made to look like a monster like figure. His look in fact is quite unsettling, but he's made to look like a very, very caricaturish monster like figure that we are kind of familiar with, right? And these all elements are supposed to be very normal in the logic of the ballet school, and that's why, because the fairy tale esque elements are normalized in such a manner, that it makes me feel that therefore the realism, even the pretense of realism which horror movies usually tend to rely on, is also being completely broken away from in this movie. Now, uh, of course, it's quite obvious that the movie is almost entirely a female cast, other than Daniel, the blind guy, and his dog, who blind guy who dies, and later on the doctor and these other professor that Susie reaches out to. And because it is working on an almost all female universe, I felt that the themes of control, secrecy, as well as female agency within these structures, they were brought out in a more highlighted and pronounced manner. Here, both the dark forces as well as the moments of solidarity and sisterhood were all part of an all female universe. So there was no need to have a metaphor of a different monster, different external monster. I mean, when we eventually find out the story of the witch, that uh, Tabot, who is actually the witch we later on find out who has started this academy, one can always have an analysis of narratives of witchcraft in itself, where it can be said that her positioning in itself is a comment against patriarchy, so on and so forth. But it's the movie does not, I feel, really bother with that at all. It is an entirely all female universe, to the extent that the evil for the evil and the good do not acquire quote unquote conventionally masculinist forms, right? Now, as I was saying, that this movie is, I felt, very beautiful, is one of the reasons is that it also, um, because it makes violence look very, very artistic. And the death that happens, it's not about jump scares or even like a very cold, calm, sinister death. It's neither of these two things. They are like a very choreographed, grotesque ballet sequences. They are just following. They are very loud. The movie does not make any qualms of not making the scenes qualms of making the scenes not loud, right? It is obvious that it is very over the top, loud, and pronounced. But they are they are filmed in a manner that it follows this very, very artistically flowy. Even if it is very jarring, it still ends up being aesthetic somehow. And one can also feel that it is through that Argento is deliberately trying to constantly make horror a very beautiful experience, so that we are always at this space where both the limits of beauty and horror is tested. And that is because it's not fully horrifying, not fully beautiful, and that is what exudes this specific kind of discomfort. Now, a little bit about Dario Argento and his other movies. He has never been known to be interested in traditional storytelling. His cinema is all about atmosphere, mood, very sensational. It deals with the sensation, right? And that is something that is present through all his other work. Before Suspiria, he had made movies like Bird with the Crystal Plumage or Deep Red. Deep Red, especially his very famous movie, like his one of his best known work. In Deep Red also follows this person waking, like this pianist witnessing a murder, and then of course things start to go completely wrong. And The Bird with the Crystal Plumage is also about a couple who goes for vacationing, and then they experience some horror and some a murder, right? In a sense, you can say that this starting with a murder and then things going bad is something that is common in his plot. So there may be, even if he is not interested in plot or storytelling in the conventional sense, it definitely, he has a signature style when it comes to plot as well. Now, as I had mentioned before, Suspiria is a part of the Inferno, the Three Mothers trilogy, right? And it has Inferno, and then this, and then there was also a movie in 2004, the name of which I'm forgetting, but they are there was another movie he made about witches. The third movie in the Three Mothers trilogy is also about witches. Now, this is just, I felt that while watching the movie, there are some theoretical points which help me understand it better. One, and I for that an adjective which can be used a lot to describe this movie would be uncanny. And I felt that the philosophical ideas of Freud's uncanny, as well as Heidegger's uncanny, both are like I'll discuss them in a minute, why and how they are different. I'm sure a lot of you already know. They are both kind of represented in this movie. Now, for Sigmund Freud, his definition of uncanny is this unsettling feeling when something familiar suddenly, something you know to be familiar, suddenly feels strange or eerie, and it brings out very repressed fears, that fears that you have repressed inside, right? And this kind of uncanny specifically blurs the lines between real and unreal, animate or inanimate. Something which is familiar but slightly off. That is what would be Freud's uncanny, like deja vu. Like you have, you think that you have experienced it, but you actually haven't. So this unsurety is definitely uncanny. When we see a humanoid figure or a robot or a dolls and mirrors, like it looks like us, but it is slightly off, right? That is where this unfamiliarity in the familiar is something that creates this sense of uncanny, right? Now, coming to this other version of uncanny from the philosopher Martin Heidegger, which would be mostly like the uncanny would be like not being at home in the world. This is more inward, this is more existential realization. So for Freud, it is the object or the setting which is familiar, which suddenly now starts being unfamiliar, right? And that's why this slight unfamiliarity is causing discomfort. For Heidegger, it is this realization that we are thrown into our existence, and the very familiar existence had never been familiar to begin with. It had never had any inherent meaning. It is basically meaningless. So feelings of alienation and our idea that whenever we feel that we are thrown into this chaotic indifferent existence, and something that leads to anxiety, or in which in his case is angst, and it is through these feelings that where you realize, no, it's not this doll or this mirror or this school, it's this is not just strange. Existence as such, world itself, is fundamentally strange. That is the sense of uncanny that Heidegger is talking about, right? Where we confront a reality where logic collapses, and is this fear of nothingness and void that overtakes us, and not about a monster. Now, I'll just say this and conclude. For me, Suspiria, I felt it kind of reflects these both, like these very different kinds of uncannies in its own way. For Freud, the dance academy for Susie, who is a trained ballet dancer, would be a familiar place, right? But it immediately turns very, very hostile. There's something, the hallways and everything, there are hidden and witches, and they are lurking evil. And so there's this feeling of something ancient, very primordial, something uh, very off-putting about the place that keeps on coming back to her. And she constantly goes into a lot of dream-like irrational spaces, and all she feels is this sense of discomfort. And that's why I feel it's through these things that the movie deals with Freud's uncanny. Whereas if we think deeper, Susie's also ends up, because ballet is very close to her, one can argue that it kind of takes ballet and not deconstruct it, it just changes the meaning of something very, very comforting and makes it absolutely devoid of its meaning. So Susie also feels this existential isolation, and the whole school has no clear meaning, and it's not just this group of people, right? And slowly, for her, logic itself begins to collapse, and therefore she is constantly forced to confront with an alien, this kind of a very chaotic reality. But this reality actually has no meaning whatsoever, right? And so, yeah, these are what I had thought. This is just my questions to everyone. Like, I would like to, because I wanted to know what everyone felt. That if Suspiria is more about creating an emotional experience than telling a story, and what was the most unsettling factor of Suspiria? Like, was it the psychological, and like, sorry, what was the most unsettling part? Like, is it like movies like Suspiria, where it's a kind of horror which is always there, where you are thrown into this thing, or it's the more very slow burn psychological and things like, maybe let's say, The Shining? And did for and how would you say that the academy felt both familiar or alien, or maybe for some viewers it can feel alien to begin with, right? And lastly, I wanted to know, how did Suspiria challenge our ideas of horror. So basically, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asmita, for that very interesting, presentation on the film. You, I think, highlighted a lot of things that I'm sure are going to lead to a very fruitful discussion. You spoke about Giallo films. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, correct? And how Suspiria both conforms to it and deviates from it in certain senses. You spoke about the aesthetics of the film, right? How horror becomes beautiful and how the use of Technicolor heightens it, correct? But also there is a certain choreographed nature to the horror, right? It makes it look beautiful. It's not very usual in the sense of the slow burn that we've come to kind of expect, right? You spoke about its haunting, trippy soundtrack, its realist elements, right? It was very interesting when you spoke about the fairy tale horror, because I was wondering about, this motif of the witch, because I think these are certain things that, you're trained to kind of pick up on, right? So, but I loved how you took it in another direction and said that probably, there's no realism in this kind of setup, so that probably may not. And how even the evil is sort of, feminine in certain senses, as is the good. So, and especially, I mean, I think it was very interesting. You spoke about the two kinds of uncanny, right? Freud's and Heidegger's. And I think it was especially helpful that you ended with a certain set of questions for us to think about, because that can, kind of get the conversation going. So I think I think your first question on the slide was whether the film was more of a sensorial kind of experience. I mean, more were you focusing more on the senses than the plot? And I think that is exactly how it was for me. And my initial reaction was also to think about how it is different from the kind of horror that I have come to expect, though I'm not really into the genre as such. But that was, and I also enjoyed it. It was just seemed very it seemed like a very enjoyable horror experience in some sense, so yeah, I think I just wanted to kick off the discussion because this was the first question on your slide. Let's see what others have to say.
Can I come in, Pragya?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashmita, for that really interesting presentation and several issues that you have discussed. And yeah, as you rightly pointed out right at the beginning, it's an absolute sensory overload. And in that sense, like an acid trip. And uh, and that dream, the dream-like look of the film, that is something that actually really strikes you. And it also takes us, makes us, like you asked the question, in what way was it different? Normally, when we watch narrative cinema, we kind of try to look for motivations, look for reasons, and look for some kind of a progress from beginning, middle to end. But here you seem to have different episodes that are happening, and there is no closure to several of them. We don't know, why right at the beginning that girl had to run away and why she was murdered and all of these things. And actually, I mean, like having recently traveled to Germany, I was wondering, why did this Italian filmmaker think of setting his film in a German dance academy? But you kind of indicated some of its reasons, like fairy tale, and we all know that. We have read Grimm's fairy tale, and you even referred to some of the fairy tales. So this whole fairy tale genre is quite intrinsic to German literature. And apart from that, I think there is some kind of a trace of fascism in the authoritarianism of these, women figures. the dance teacher, the way she conducts herself, the way she, puts all the students together and makes them practice. So, although of course this was made in 77, but some kind of traces, shadows of that. And with regard to the genre of horror, I think one particular feature which Argento borrows from the horror genre is the use of the dog. And that is quite typical of horror films. Like, there are several films that use, but I think off the cuff, I can think of Omen. That child, Damien, has a dog. I don't know what was the breed? I think it was a Rottweiler, if I'm not mistaken. And Rottweilers have this reputation of being very ferocious and all of that. So here it is a German Shepherd and absolutely docile, and he is a benign character. But something changes, and he actually ends up killing Daniel. And that whole scene is like, I mean, seems like a very typical horror film scene. The whole place with the, with iconic buildings of Munich, but absolutely deserted, dark, and then those sounds, that are there in the background, and the dog picking up on that uncanniness of that whole atmosphere. And then suddenly, like as if he's almost like an agent of some evil force, he grabs Daniel's neck and kills him. And just one last thing, and that is the title. Suspiria, I was reading, means sigh, breath, from suspirium. And you spoke, of course, about the music and Goblin's prog rock band that gave the music for this film. And they have actually incorporated, sighs and whispers and all of these, not just as part of the background, but it is there in the music score itself. So that I thought was very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for suggesting this film. Like Pragnya, I'm also not too much into horror, but I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, I especially about the fascism that you mentioned. It is very, because for other horror, other movies that I have watched, usually I have seen them utilized a coven as a subversive, like something, a symbol of service. Other than that, of course, like something which is a very outrightly very prominently Christian horror, they would talk about, which is as evil, that is there. But even then, movies which talk about evils won't really talk about them as a symbol of fascism, or like some kind of a lurking fascism. So interestingly here to see this kind of a thing, because again, the witch who is the so-called witch who had to start this coven for this, and make the ballet academy as a front for her coven, was herself kind of ostracized to some places, and that was implied. But then it ended up being like that. So yeah, this is yeah, it's interesting to think of the school as a site of, or like as a symbol of fascism in that sense. Yeah.
Anyone else who'd like to go next?
Prajna, just to kind of fill in the silence.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So Yeah, couple of things. Like David, I too found the print of the film so poor. It was really tried everything, both the links, and it was difficult, to kind of concentrate with, when the print is not great and the audio and video don't match. But having said that, Ashmita, like the kind of things that even a poor print cannot mask are the colors, the vibrant colors, and the soundscape of the film. I mean, it's quite stunning. Um, but I was also thinking, I mean, this is not something I have developed, a thought that I have developed very well, but I was also thinking that, there is I mean, I want to ask you because you have watched the film probably more closely than I have done. Um, there is a kind of masculinization of uh, I thought some of the teachers and the characters, and also Susie's own, extreme feminization. This lost girl kind of a look. Constant. I mean, she's sleepy through the. So there's something about a young girl. uh, I don't know what the unawakened part refers to. Does it refer to some kind of an unawakened libido? I don't know. I mean, I'm just wildly guessing. But I was also thinking there might be something about the masculinization of these women. Also, there are undercurrents of homoeroticism among the character, among the dancers at certain moments. I mean, I don't know if I was imagining, if these are just idle thoughts. But since you have been with the film, maybe you can speak more. But these were my thoughts about the film. Thank you, Ashmita, for suggesting this film and telling us what to look for. When I do a rewatch, I like to watch it through some of the points that your discussion has taken me to. Thank you.
Yeah. About the masculinization of, I I haven't really thought about it specifically in terms of Suspiria, because women in little slightly older, or even like a lot of movies where they showcase uh, especially matriarchal or matronly figures, like characters in like female characters in control, who are supposed to be authoritarian to some extent. I have noticed that these characters are usually portrayed with a lot of um, the traits which are quote unquote masculine. So I maybe I'll think about it, but specifically for like, let's say, Miss Tanner, or the directress of the academy, I had not really thought about it in that manner. But overall, yes, I would say that despite the characters and despite the plot being extremely or like women centric, it is very women written by men. So it follows the tropes of femininity, which perhaps is not something that will be, had it been, had the narrative also been created by women. So in the sense that how, as you rightly pointed out, how Susie is portrayed as a very pure kind of girl, this very pure almost like implicitly virgin, innocent figure who is there to fight against the corrupt women of the coven. That obviously one can argue is something which is written from a very gendered perspective. So in this specific manner. And about the homoeroticism, yeah, in the sense that because the movie also showcased a lot of sisterhood and closeness and proximity and this companionship. Usually the depictions of those in a condensed environment do tend to also involve elements of homoeroticism, but yes, that can all that can be like inferred from this film. Yeah.
No, actually, I don't know. I didn't say what I wanted to say properly, I think. I feel the horror is not from what you would expect, which is uh, the overt scares. I think the horror is in what it kind of um, does not elaborate, like the horror of homoeroticism. I thought was I don't know, I mean, I'm again just guessing, but I thought that's what, because the scares are so obvious, so uh, uh, but I thought the film was developing that. I'll stop here. I think Pallavi has a more intelligible response to the film, so thanks. Yeah.
I don't know if I can take that much credit for it being intelligible. Thank you so much for this presentation. I actually love not horror per se, but films that really embody the uncanny, like a certain strangeness or estrangement. And surrealist film often does that really well. So horror is not always my genre, but the fairy tale conversation actually made me wonder, like, how do you see the film engaging with, and I think it is very engaged with, somewhat, I want to say, misogynist trends within fairy tale traditions, right? Like the ways in which women in authority figures are often demonized or seen as dangerous or controlling and disciplining in these ways. Often it is a child in the fairy tale, right? Like Grimm's fairy tales are particularly notorious for this, where the child is under the maternal authority, and there's very much the escape from the maternal and parental authority drives a lot of the uncanniness and strangeness of the European fairy tales of a certain era. And I felt like some of those elements were here, especially with the headmistress figure, the dance academy. But the other genre that this really reminded me of is Gothic horror, and the ways in which women navigate Gothic architecture, which I long ago read something about Jane Eyre talking about, that talked about how Bronte imagines a woman navigating this mansion and all of its unknowable spaces, its dark corners, as a way of also exploring her body. And so I was very interested if you had any insight into how the film treats the female body, because I feel like there are elements of body horror, the graphic stabbing of I think it's Pat in the earlier sections, right? The knife is constantly seen entering, leaving. It's very, almost, I will say, it's erotic in its implications of penetration and so on. But there is also, I think, the haunting of the house, the windows and dark spaces as sort of, very Freudian in the ways in which it calls upon the unconscious and all of that, but also as seeing the female body and perhaps a female mind as this technicolor space, right? Like almost as if it is a very over the top, a sensory overload. You asked if the film is an emotional experience, and I'm wondering if there's a difference between a sensory experience and an emotional experience, right? Like I feel like the two can be connected in some ways. Like an assault on the senses very much does feel sometimes like it is evoking emotions from us, but I am also thinking there is something very feminizing about that, right? Like in this very second wave feminist way of what the female experience is like. And because it is coming from a male director, it has certain I think, mystifications, right, of what the female psyche is. I mean, a lot of thoughts as I was watching this really were sort of unleashed in this vein. I don't really have an intelligible question, and I don't think this film is meant to evoke a very coherent intellectual conversation in that way, right? It is very impressionistic in what it is trying to do. So, yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on any of these. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that response. Yeah, I mean, yes, because one of the things is that I have read it in a couple of places that Argento was inspired by Grimm's fairy tales when he made the movie. But aside from that, it does deal with a lot of misogynistic tropes of fairy tales, especially if you can make allusions to Snow White. It is the logic is very similar. Like there is an evil queen, and it's the the authoritative figures are definitely very characteristic of this dark evil
Mm-hmm.
queen that we see, and there's the more naive lost in the woods deer in the headlights, like younger child who walks into their ploy. So in the sense that yeah, in one way, the fact that it does not involve an external monster who is, let's say, a wolf or a or some other monster which is male, eh, and both are female, but definitely the notions of the fairy tale female is misogynistic. And
Mm-hmm.
simply from, again, this is yet again a horror movie which takes the, in that sense, the low hanging fruit of witches and coven as the source of all evil. Definitely also plays into that things, uh, but yeah, so that is the first thing that you pointed out, which and it has given me a lot to think about. And yeah, there are definitely elements. It's not body horror in the sense, but it's like when you mention the knife or this the objects going in, piercing in and out of it, and then this very viscerally engaging experience that this movie creates, that is so aesthetic, but also, I mean, aesthetic in a more negative way, where
Mm-hmm.
you are not, you where I always felt that, like Susie, I am also constantly thrown into this completely meaningless, like absolutely bizarre, uncanny experience where where to find a language to give sense to everything is probably meaningless. It's just to get out of it. So yeah. Yeah, but thank you so much for your inputs. That I will definitely think about them.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Is there anyone else who would like to go in at this
I
stage?
would just like to come in. I hope
Yes,
I'm
please.
loud enough, right?
Yes.
When we're talking about all this female misogyny and all that kind of thing, we also have the gargoyles in the last scene on the door when she goes out of it, right? And that's the door where um, the first scene also happens, right? Yeah, so I think that is supposed to be a representation of female carnality, right? And at one level, when we talk about witches, uh, I think Addison Steele, I think Joseph Addison talks about it somewhere, where he's talking about how reprehensible the whole idea of teaching a person, treating a person as witch is, right? And we go back to George Eliot and Mill on the Floss, where if this person is a witch and she swims across the river, if she swims across the river, men are waiting on the other side to get rid of her. And if she doesn't swim across the river and she drowns, that's okay, right? And that's the way she ends. So anyhow, so that's as bad as it is. And Geeta's point was interesting because there's one scene which goes and focuses on the eagle, right? And just when this guy is going dying, Daniel is dying, right? So that also I think is something very important because well, how he links it up with fascism and all that, this idea of control is something again which is interesting. Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to say. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Especially, I had not thought about the door and her escape in that manner, but yes, one can think of it. And yes, I also I forgot about Pallavi's point. It does when you talk about Jane Eyre, the ballet school is exactly structured or like represented in such a way that there is not in the sense that Jane Eyre, like when she eventually finds out of Bertha's room that there is a room out there where and nobody is allowed to go, and here also the girls know that there is a shadowy figure, whether or not the directors stay back at night, and there's this snoring figure. I did feel like there's a lot of parallels about with gothic fiction as well. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anyone else? I think there is just I'll give people some time to think when they want to come in. I just had a few things to kind of, all this discussion has made me think about. So I think this point about, I think when we think about uh, the homoeroticism, I think one of the things that came to my mind was the swimming sequence, right? Where the two of them as friends are swimming, and I just noticed that the camera was kind of at the very top, a very kind of a wide shot. So I think that is something that came to my mind. The second thing that I was thinking about, also just trying to unpack, why this is different from a usual, the kind of horror that we've come to expect. I think it's because just the first murder or death, is so out there, it's so outrageous, so erotic also, as Pallavi said, and then after that there is a lull. It feels like it takes time to build up, and and then the violence that you're expecting doesn't actually come, and you kind of that's when I think I started enjoying the just these visuals and the color, and the music is also very good, no? And the thing about when we were talking about fairy tales, the one thing that just came to my mind as we were talking about this is that when the expert, I'm forgetting his name, right? When Susie goes to speak to that expert, and he says, "Yes, I've known certain witches in my life, and what they're interested in is wealth and power. Uh, even if, and just as I was thinking, I think when we think about the evil queen, generally the point of friction or conflict is beauty. It's with the kind of, in a Snow White kind of tale. So I think that's just something that came to my mind. Maybe I think the filmmaker has done something slightly different there. I think there's a comment from Pallavi. We could take a look at that.
Just a comment on the architecture. I just found it all the geometric sort of shapes also as very interesting. The squareness, the almost hexagonal movements, I think, just very there's something very evocative about imagining the unruliness of the human body in a space that is so not designed for the human body, right? Like that there's something about that going on in that in the way in which she runs through these buildings that is very classically horror. Um, and I think her feminine beauty is a part of this. Like it is the threat of violence against beauty that is constantly driving a lot of these horror forms. And it's also a commentary, I think, on female autonomy particularly, but I think there is also an implicit fear of feminine desire and feminine sexuality as this rogue element. And some of that is reflected here. And I think even in Argento's interview, sometimes when he talks, you're a little bit like, oh, this is a 70s guy. Like he does sound like that. But it is interesting to see what a visualization of that can do. Like I do think it's still very arresting to see a mostly female-centered film like this with all of the female characters, doing things, representing threats to each other. Like there is both the threat against sorority, threat against feminine desire. There's a lot of I feel implicit sort of frictions that come out of the representation that are interesting to unpack, and then of course the sensory choices. I think the real aesthetic choices are very striking for that as well.
Yeah, and also I feel how this movie, like usually mirrors and horror movies have had this eternal connection. But whenever initially, like I don't know, it's not a mirror or this shard of glass that as Susie is initially on her first day is walking down the corridors and it's just flashing in her eyes and she just feels very very sick after that and delirious and this and even the maggots and all these on one hand they are very directly fairy tale esque, but on the other hand I feel that that is to me it seemed a little bit different. I'm not being able to articulate in what way because this insect infestation and mirrors and a character going feeling dizzy are all elements that are classically there in the horror universe, but I feel how Argento does it is specifically somehow his execution of that feels very very distinct and also yeah, even the autonomy, like if they're trying to comment on the female autonomy and all, it is to me it still comes across as you also have like mentioned that it's the autonomy of the it's like the independent giving the woman the independence to be sort of naive, pure and artistic in this traditional sense and not being corrupted by like other women who are more powerful or like there's this slight kind of there's this slight assumption that if you this all women ballet school which is extremely popular and extremely like powerful is because of female desire gone uh, like uh, gone extreme or it's going desire going out of control. So yeah, that is also something that I had felt.
Okay. Anyone else would like to come in at this point? Mm, uh, Vidya, Yagnashri, Madhurima, do you have anything to say? I think what, Pallavi said about how a film like this is probably, there's only, it's meant more to be kind of, experienced than,
So, yeah.
yeah, I think it's just, it certainly felt that way to me. I don't know about the rest, but
Yeah.
are there any more comments or questions? Probably does anyone have any responses to the questions that Ashmita had put on the slides? So, I mean, you were talking about how this is a cult horror film, right? So, I read somewhere that the kind of music that is used in the film also becomes something that inspires music in horror films later on. I mean, is that something because you like the genre, is just something uh, I just wanted to know if you have any, you know, if you have
if,
a take
if
on it.
if the music is like did it like create some kind of a thing like sorry, can you
I mean, I think I must have read it probably, as I was reading about the film. Some people also said the music of the film is so iconic that it has gone on to kind of, uh, you know, um, give rise to, it has inspired what has become a stereotypical or a prototypical kind of, horror
I
soundtrack.
yeah, I have definitely. I don't know exactly like if goblins specifically or these kinds of like the technicalities of music. I'm not very
Yeah,
well versed
imagine.
with, so I don't know. But I from to a layman's ears, I can understand that this particular tenor and texture of the sound that we see in the see in this movie like as a background score, and especially to create this very signature style. I don't know if this movie created that or at least contributed to that in some way, but yeah, I in recent movies I do see like some movies are associated with
Okay.
like a signature style. But then again, like for Psycho also, that even though it was not such an ambient thing, but the
Hmm.
background score of Psycho is also quite iconic. So
Iconic in
I,
that
I
sense.
yeah,
Correct.
I feel it's because this goblins like this rock band sound is so all encompassing and so like present everywhere, just like the colors. I feel that is why it's a lot of people's favorites. But other than that, I think the iconicness is because of the movie's popularity, and popularity of Goblin also
Right.
did, like after working with Argento, it increased, and they're
Oh,
still active, so to speak, the
okay.
band. So
Okay.
yeah,
Wow. I will look them up then in that case. I think there's a comment thanking you for the
yeah.
wonderful presentation. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yes.
Yagesh.
Anyone else who would like to come in? Professor Tarakeshwar?
Thank you. I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anyone else who has anything they'd like to add? Yeah. I think Pallavi is thanking you for the suggestion again. And
I have not watched the remake, so I don't know.
yeah, there is a remake, no? Yeah.
I
Yeah,
watched it for
Even
Tilda Swinton, who I'm a huge fan of, but
yeah.
it was not it didn't quite have this impact at all, actually.
I
okay.
also the only thing that I know about the remake is that it has Tilda Swinton, so that's all. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I will probably go and watch the rewatch. I mean the remake and see what I feel. Okay. Uh, all right.
Yeah.
I think if nobody else has anything to say, we can just start wrapping up the discussion. Okay, all right. I think we can just wait for half a minute to see if, sometimes, I mean, takes time to kind of. Okay, all right. I think we can call this discussion to a close. Thank you so much, Ashmita, for
Thank
suggesting this film. I really enjoyed it. And I think that's one of the parts of TFO that I really enjoy. There are films that I would not typically uh, no, it's just such a learning process to find out about these films and watch them and enter into a discussion like this. Thank you to everyone who joined the discussion today, for the comments and for, making this a really learning experience. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. We'll see you again next Saturday.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashmita. Thank you. Thanks, Pradnya. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Yeah. Good night.
Good
Bye.
night.